A question that I think that many people get when they are late diagnosed, whether that is late diagnosed autistic, whether that is late diagnosed with ADHD, or whether that is late diagnosed with a personality disorder, or whether it's late diagnosed with a mental health condition, is why is it important? Like, you've managed to get to this point of your life absolutely fine, which is just hilarious, and why would it matter now? It's not going to change anything. And I guess fundamentally, they are not completely wrong in the sense that, is it going to change who I am? Is it going to suddenly give me some sort of magic fix all solution? I guess not. However, there are many reasons why a late diagnosis is so important, and I am going to break it down for you now. Just because I think that many of us know, especially if we are late diagnosed, the importance of it, the journey that it takes you on. But sometimes we do not always have the points at hand to validate ourselves, advocate for ourselves, and truly know, actually, yes, late diagnosis is so important. And here is the reason why. I'm going to input a video in a minute from a doctor who is on TikTok, and he words it beautifully, but he goes on to basically talk about how it might seem like just a word, because fundamentally, ultimately, that's what it is, especially for me and autism, because there isn't a medication that I can take to help with my bipolar or to help with my ADHD. There isn't something like that for autism. But it might seem like a word to some people, but for me, it encompasses and it better describes all that I am going through. It better describes all my lifelong experiences than, say, anxiety does. Because anxiety is something that I fundamentally struggle with every single day of my life. And I have done from the moment that I can remember. And although I think that is an important thing to know about myself, that I have anxiety, it doesn't describe effectively the umbrella of experiences that I've had. Whereas autism does.
Still processing that I'm autistic, and it's huge news because I'm in my 30s and it all makes sense now. So I do feel like, I don't know, I feel relieved.
A common question that I get is, what's the point of pursuing an ADHD or an autism diagnosis? Is it going to change me? I've been living this way my whole life. So what does a diagnosis do for me now that I'm in my 30s or 40s? And I think a diagnosis is important because all a diagnosis is a word, right? A word or a term that better explains the majority of your symptoms. And when you can do this, you can take the pressure off of yourself. The way people feel is important. And now, instead of hating yourself and saying, oh, yeah, I'm lazy, I'm motivated, I have a hard time talking to people, I'm an outsider. Now you can say, I have autism, and there's nothing wrong with that. I have ADHD, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm bipolar, schizophrenia, so on and so forth. And when you have a term that better explains the majority of your symptoms, you can begin the process of finding out different ways to love and appreciate yourself. Because if you're diagnosed later in life, there's a good chance that you spent your formative years being frustrated with who you were as a person and not liking who you are. So now we need a new way to live. And this way is going to start with us appreciating ourselves.
It explained lifelong struggles and differences, and it gave me a clarity that I have not had one day of my life before my diagnosis. Everything was just, it felt like muddling through, trying to fathom why things were so much more challenging, even though it was internally for me, and how I genuinely, for a large period of my earlier life, thought that everybody was up against the same challenges that I was. It wasn't until conversations was had or things was said where I realised, like, damn, they do not operate the way that I operate. They aren't contending with the same things I am contending with. And the diagnosis of autism for me was something that gave me a great level of clarity, it gave me a level of relief, a relief that there is not something fundamentally faulty with me. It gave me a relief that I've never had the clarity to experience before, which is that I had the fundamental understanding for a long time that there was something different about me, but ultimately that I felt like that equaled that there was something wrong with me, that I just wasn't managing, or that there was something that I just couldn't do in comparison to other people, and I was fundamentally flawed to a degree, and that I just needed to turn on myself. I just needed to accept that there is something fundamentally wrong with me. Whereas an autism diagnosis, it helps you understand that you are not flawed, that in fact your brain operates and works differently, and that gives you an answer to all of your experience, and then you get to ultimately go back and see your life through a whole new lens. And that is something else that people tend to say too, which is you're not going to be able to change your past experiences. And you're right, I'm not. I still get to see that the past experiences happened because I was autistic, and I experienced them the way that I did because I was autistic. But I now get to have a clarity and hindsight, because hindsight is a beautiful thing. It gives us that 20/20 vision, that actually, how would that have been different had I known that I was autistic? And I also think that it's important that I get to live from this point forward with a clarity, like a definite clarity, from this point forward, of how I need to take care of myself, and how I need to see myself, and how I need to understand myself, and how I need to teach others to also see and understand me moving forward, that I never would have had if I didn't have the diagnosis. So I was self-diagnosed to a degree, but there was always an element of imposter syndrome when I was self-diagnosed, that maybe I just got it wrong, or maybe I was just missing something, or maybe I could just be wrong, because I was always considered as something being wrong with me, that it was almost instinct to question myself. And I know that, again, that is not unique to anybody who is autistic. So you're naturally you spent a lifetime being gaslit, being almost, your version of reality is a different version of reality. And although two people might be experiencing something similar, we are absolutely not having the same experience, because actually the profile in which I am experiencing and the profile in which you are experiencing are two different things altogether. And I think that it gave me a definite clarity that actually there is a reason and there's nothing faulty with me. I just operate differently. And then the element of self-acceptance comes forward because of that, which is that actually that thing that seems just like a word to anybody else helps to explain your experience to a degree that has never better explained your experience before. So an example of this for me in my early years would be that I did desire social connection, and I had friends, which again I know is quite a fortunate thing with the autistic experience. But when the play with friends became unstructured and it didn't have a set of rules or specific and well-known outcomes, I would just begin to internally melt down, internally shut down, need to escape. And that never made sense to me before. I felt like am I being manipulative? Like, because it's not going the way that I want. And now I realise that it's nothing to do with it going the way that I want. It's just a fundamental fear that I genuinely feel like I'm going to be exposed as not understanding how to operate in something so casual. And do you see how even just something as simple as that, the way in which I'm talking to myself and about myself is totally different through the lens of knowing I'm autistic and the lens of not knowing I'm autistic? Something that I also think that a lot of autistic people tend to have, whether they know it or they don't know it, is, and I will try to input an image here, there is this wheel of invalidation trauma. And we know that an autistic person in particular, but again, I guess any sort of difference where you are a minority of any kind, you are probably going to experience this inherently. We know that you have a predisposition to experience a lot more trauma. One, because of the positions and the potential experiences that you can have, but two, the lens in which you interpret it because of our higher sensitivities. But the amount of invalidation trauma that you experience, that you are just told you are just too sensitive, and that everybody else is not bothered by those things, but you are bothered by those things, and that you just have to get over it. And there's the unpicking of that. Once you know that you have experienced that you are now getting to see it through a lens of understanding and clarity and validation, rather than a lens of minimizing, a lens of scrutiny, a lens of that there is something fundamentally wrong with you.
Who are masking enough to be missed as autistic until they are adults get themselves into a lot of problems and situations that they just don't have the knowledge or ability to navigate appropriately, so that by the time they reach a point where they have gained a diagnosis, they've usually racked up a lifetime of misfortune and trauma and follied circumstances and false starts and what can look from the outside like arrested development. Sometimes the damage is so severe that a person can end up feeling hopeless because they know that it will take years to decades to dig themselves out of the mess. For a lot of late diagnosed autistics, receiving that diagnosis is validating in that it helps us understand and reframe our past experiences in a way that gives us a chance to be compassionate. But that doesn't automatically translate to everybody else around us doing the same. Sometimes by the point that we have an understanding of what's been going on for us, we've accidentally burned bridges or lost connections and opportunities with people who thought that the explanation for our troubles was something different than what it turned out to be.
Second group of things that a late diagnosis really helps with is better mental health and overall better self-management. Because, as an example, pretty much everybody that I know who is late diagnosed has comorbid mental health conditions that have been diagnosed and been picked up way before their diagnosis was picked up, which would be your anxiety. It could be either chronic, general, OCD, the intrusive thoughts, or they could be things like your lifelong battle with depression. I know that I have been through those experiences where, again, I was seeing them through this lens of I have anxiety, I have depression, and I didn't know why I had them. I knew some of the things that was contributing to them, definitely. Like, I was aware that I just have anxiety about things that no matter how many times I place myself in that situation, I don't increase in the confidence muscle of that particular area. For example, driving. I have extreme anxiety about traveling to somewhere new, and it is no matter how much I prepare, I know that I can decrease my anxiety to a degree, as long as I check the route and I go through that route at least 4 or 5 times before I do the new route, but I still know that I'm going to experience a level of anxiety that most people do not experience. And I never saw it through the lens of the truth, which was the umbrella that, again, like I said right at the beginning, helps make sense of all of my life experience, not just some of my life experience. But then seeing it through the lens of autism and the fact that it's something new, it's change, it's fear-based, it's anxiety-based, and being able to understand that actually my anxiety is something that I'm going to live with long term. It's not something that I can better prepare myself, but I can't ever get rid of it entirely. It means that I'm coming at it from a different angle and with a better level of understanding. And the same thing with my depression. There are things now that I can see contributed to my depression, experiences that, again, I'd had due to being autistic, as well as a naivety that I'd experienced, as well as a lack of understanding about myself, that all contributed to me falling into this pit of depression that I now see through a different lens, because I understand that underneath the depression I have a lifelong disability that is contributing to it, that I can now better manage because I have a late diagnosis. I also think it helps you know and begin to advocate for yourself that you will need support and that you will need accommodations, and you will need to do this for yourself too, but you will also need to ask for help too, that you wouldn't have ever been able to do before, because you fundamentally assume that as an adult, you should just have that shit together, and that you should just know how to do that, and that you should just be functioning the same day to day, when we know that fundamentally that just isn't true. An example of this would be that I never knew that my sensory profile could be helped and assisted with an occupational therapist. I never knew that, not in like an ableist way, in a way that actually they see your experience as it is and they help you manage the experience as it is without you having to fundamentally change yourself. Like, that is revolutionary. And I think that the other reason why a late diagnosis is important is not just the clarity, not just the sort of relief that it gives you, not just reframing things, not just seeing it through a new lens of understanding, not just the better mental health and self-management, but I think that it also explains the lifelong struggles that you've had in all areas of your life. Because I think that people think that once you have the diagnosis, that you're just going to be better. But that is not how it operates, and that is not what a disability is. It's the, yes, knowing that, for example, your autism contributed to your school difficulties, which also contributed to your career development and the amount of hours you can work before getting burnt out, the amount of interaction you can have, where no matter how hard you try at fine-tuning your skills and masking, that you are always just going to really, really struggle in terms of exhaustion and in terms of burning yourself out, but it will also help you have the clarity that rather than battling yourself, it is something that you have to accept about yourself so that you can better navigate any future experiences, whether that is in further education, whether that is in social interaction and your relationships with others, whether that is in the better management of your mental health moving forward, or whether that is in relation to how do I understand myself to a better degree now I know this, so that I can take care of myself differently and manage myself in a way where I'm not heading continually to burnout. And I think that the last thing that is really important, in my opinion, is that the moment that you get a late diagnosis, whether it seems important to other people or not, when we have spent a lifetime of feeling completely alien and completely alone, we are suddenly integrated into a community of people, of fellow late diagnosed people, that we start to feel less alone. And that is so golden. That is something that money cannot buy, because that sense of connection, that sense of understanding that we have searched for our whole life now begins to become accessible, and we begin to experience that for the first time at 20, 30, 40, 50, 60. And everybody deserves that. Everybody really deserves that. I hope this has been helpful. I would love to know your thoughts. Do you think that late diagnosis is important? Do you believe that people deserve to know the truth about what they're struggling with and who they are, and see themselves and understand themselves through a lens that is so much clearer, like putting on a pair of glasses when you have walked around not being able to see your whole life? I certainly do. I'd love to know your thoughts. Take care. Speak soon.